Please have a seat. Get started here. Get Lisa here. Be ready. Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to the Chinese Historical Society of America. Really happy that you're here. We've been around for 65 years. I'm really honored that you took the time on a beautiful Saturday morning to be here with our distinguished guests, panelists, and our moderator. So welcome again. If it's your first time, please come back. Hopefully we'll be here for another 60 years, by which time I hopefully will not be the co-president of the board. I can't because I'm already 70-something. So appreciate your being here. I'm going to turn it over to Justin Hoover, who is our creative director. He will moderate.
Tell us your name.
I'm sorry, my name is Walter Lim. I was hoping you remember that. Thank you all, and I'll turn it over to Justin. Justin is our creative director for Chinese Historical Society of America. Has done tons of stuff for us. If you haven't met him, please come by and introduce yourself to him. Yourself and Justin will tell you all about CHSA. We have plenty of refreshments, drinks, help yourself. Please take all of them because we don't want them here at 12:30. Thank you so much, Justin.
Everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. This is a collaboration between a bunch of groups. So Jeff Chang obviously came to us. So cheers for Jeff. But also big thanks to Nick G in the back for helping us with this. The Chinese Affirmative Action is an amazing organization we partnered with on this. Also, big shout out thanks to Gold House for their sponsorship and to the Civic Joy Fund for their sponsorship. And CAA helped sponsor this, like I said, so I'd like to pass this off. We're going to pass the mic. Annie Lee with the Chinese for Affirmative Action would like to say a couple words.
Hi everyone, I'm so excited to be here and learn more about Jeff's new book, Water, Mirror, Echo, about Bruce Lee. My name is Annie Lee, and I'm the Managing Director of Policy at Chinese for Affirmative Action, CAA, one of the proud co-sponsors of today's event. So I told my 4.5-year-old that I couldn't take him to a birthday party today because I'm going to this Bruce Lee event, and he got so excited because he loves Li Xiaolong. He loves Li Xiaolong. And it was stunning to me that my biracial, black and Chinese child, born in the year 2020, knows and loves Bruce Lee. Like this man has transcended time and race, and it's really incredible and also very humbling because, you know, when I think about Bruce Lee, I'm like, that's never gonna be me. Like, I'm never going to be a martial artist, I'm never gonna be in movies, I'm never gonna be a cultural touchstone for decades to come. And it makes me reflect on just like, sometimes I just feel really small, and especially at this point in our history, in our country. I think it's really easy to feel depressed and frustrated and small given everything that's happening and the terror that is unleashed on our communities every day since January 20th. And so that's why I think it's really important to tell you about a policy priority that CAA is working on this fall. It is Proposition 50. Prop 50 is the rare opportunity for everyday people like me, like you, to make a difference to save our country and our democracy. We have already seen what they have done in Texas. In Texas, Republicans know that their policies are unpopular. They know people don't think it's fair to rip families apart without due process. They know people don't like government messing with their health care and their insurance. They know that people don't like censorship in our schools. And that is why they are not letting their voters choose them. They are choosing their voters. They are trying to enshrine themselves in power indefinitely. And Prop 50 is our response. It's California's way of fighting back and saying, no, our voices still matter. Our democracy is still real. And that is why I urge you to vote yes on Prop 50. And I need you to get all your family and friends to vote yes on Prop 50. And I need you to join us. CAA is doing phone banking. Ballots drop on Monday. We have a very short window between Monday and the special election on November 4th, a very short window to contact all of the voters in this great state who already believe what we believe. They just need a nudge. They need a nudge to go and vote, and we need you to help us. So I want you to, CAA family, raise your hands. I want you to find one of us after this and ask us, how can we join this movement? Because it really is a movement. So some of you know, I started my career as an 11th grade US history teacher. I'm also from San Francisco, born and raised, so I have a special love for Asian American and Chinese American history in San Francisco. And that includes Bruce Lee, who's born in Chinatown here, but it also includes Mamie Tate. It also includes Wong Kim Ark, Yik Wo, Kenny Lau and his classmates at Gene Parker Elementary School. This is our legacy. You and I, we come from this legacy of Asian American activists who did advance civil rights, not just for our community, but for all communities. And it is our duty, our obligation, to preserve democracy for our next generations. These things are not promised. They are only fought for by everyday people like you and me. So again, I urge you to vote yes on Prop 50. Find a staff member. We have to continue this legacy of Asian American activism and advancing civil rights. Thank you so much. I'm going to get
So thank you all for being here. Today you can buy a book from one of Jeff's books and have him sign it. And then I'll do a little introduction here. So we have Jeff Chang, the author, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, The History of Hip Hop in America, and then also the new book, Water, Mirror, Echo, Bruce Lee and the Making of Asian America. So a round of applause for Jeff Chang. And Adisa Banjoko, who's an artist, who's a martial artist, jiu-jitsu. He goes by 64 Blocks, also known as the Bishop, and teaches chess, he teaches jiu-jitsu, and he is a community activist committee member here in the Bay Area. Round of applause for Adisa. So today, this is our special intimate affair VIP event. So, grab some food if you haven't had it, grab some tea. And then down the street, we're going to have on Waverly Place, the One Family Block Party. And the upstairs exhibition, Bruce Lee, Under the Sky, We Are One Family. Bruce Lee said, under the heavens, on the earth, we are just one family. And he meant that could be interpreted in many ways. Between martial arts schools and styles, it all comes from one central element. But also, more broadly, our race, our identities, our cultures, it's our progressive, as we grow up, our thoughts and our proclivities divide us. But really, kind of essentially, we all have one human identity, and let's try to get back to what that is. So Bruce Lee, if you look at Jeff Chin's shirt here, he has this great shirt, there's Jeff, it says, make a friend who doesn't look like you, and maybe you'll change the world from being far, right? And I think that's the ethos of the one family philosophy of the movement we're trying to grow, is that we are one family, whether black, Asian, white, Filipino, Mexican, whatever. And I know it's rather like United Colors of Benetton 1994 to say that, but at the same time, there's like a reality to that we need to identify that when we're further divided in our worlds, that's how power gets lost, and that's how we lose our voice. So that's going to be the main topic of today, and I want us to have fun here. We'll be here until 11:30, and then we'll be breaking, and they'll be going down to Waverly. So come, we'll have books for sale, we'll have some Bruce Lee merchandise. We have a really cool new CHSA mobile art platform that we're launching where you can make posters and take them home. The San Francisco Library's bookmobile is there. There'll be some vendors. We'll have a really amazing group of performers performing. We'll have two rappers, Stoneman02 and Unlearn the World, really awesome artists. And then we'll have Legacy Martial Arts doing a demonstration. Adisa is going to show and talk about the history of Bruce Lee and joint locks and trapping. Then we'll have Sheldon, who's right over here. What's up, Sheldon? He's a martial artist. Studied here in Chinatown. He'll be performing. And Joy Dunwood will be performing. And then we go into the musical portion of it with music and DJs and live bands and rappers. So, all right, I'm going to sit down. That's my intro. I would like to say, this Bruce Lee movement that's re-emerged over the years is really quite something special. And I think that in the most recent evolution of Stop Asian Hate, because of the recent kind of fears of COVID and anti-Asian sentiments, we have found ourselves in Chinatown and in the Asian American communities kind of with our backs against the wall in many ways. We look to Bruce as a guiding principle on how to continue to be bold and to be courageous and to be proud and to build our community. And I'd like to start with Jeff here, and this is really like at the core of your book, Water, Mirror, Echo, Bruce Lee, The Making of Asian America, is how Bruce Lee came into this place of power, and how that paralleled the rise of the Asian American movement and what that meant, and in a way, how the larger civil rights movement grew from positions of awareness and intellect and analysis of the situation, anti-war sentiments, but also really looking at how we were defying the expectations of a ruling class and building power for the Asian American community, and how that paralleled the rise of hip hop, and how the hip hop movement evolved in similar ways as a form of resistance, and it became a place where people could express themselves. So I'd like to start off with just Jeff talking about what his book is, what the inspiration for coming up with the book is, and let's get into that conversation on how did we develop this movement of Asian American identity, and where Bruce Lee's growth of power fell into that maelstrom of energies that was the civil rights movement in the early part. Okay.
Thank you. Everybody can hear me, right? Thank you all for coming today. Thank you so much, Justin. Thank you to all the sponsors, to CAA, my ride or dies for so many years, to On Waverly, Gold House. Thank you so much, and of course, so much mahalos to you for leading this, Justin, and to the Chinese Historical Society for hosting us today. It's humbling to be able to be here in San Francisco, Chinatown, just 2 blocks away from where Bruce was born, right? In 1940, he'd be, 85 this year. And to be able to kind of reflect on what his life means with all of you, to all of us who have been now 3 generations since his passing, so deeply moved, enamored, inspired by Bruce's life. So, because of hip hop, I'll tell you the story about how the book got going. Maybe that's the way to enter this. Because of hip hop is why somebody approached me to write this particular book. It was many, many years ago. Adis and I were much younger then. But I read this book called Can't Stop, Won't Stop, History of the Hip Hop Generation, which was sort of a take on these kids, these black kids and brown kids in the Bronx who, sort of in the tradition of the black freedom culture, had generated the newest sort of edition, the newest permutation of black freedom culture in hip hop. And I'm just fond of these stories in which outsider kids who are stomped on, who are abandoned, are able to find their voice and use their creativity to be able to change the world. So a Korean American guy came to me one day, and he's an editor, and he was like, "You did this book on hip hop, you should be able to do a book on Bruce Lee, yeah?" And I was like, yeah. It was a similar type of story, Bruce coming from Chinatown and from Hong Kong, from the margins of society, from living in a British colony, living in segregated Chinatown, and then going on to change the world with Kung Fu culture, with Asian fighting arts and Asian philosophy. And so that was kind of the promise of the book. And so I started working on it a long time ago, and I had to finish other books. But what happened was as you had mentioned, sort of during the pandemic, when violence against us was spiking, that was when the image of Bruce reappears, right? Like just a couple of blocks down, like all over the place in Chinatown here, in Oakland, Chinatown, right? In in Los Angeles, in New York, in Philadelphia, and also on all of our social feeds. And it was like we were looking for a symbol of power and of pride, and also unity, solidarity. Like, if you could see Bruce Lee, can you see what's happening to us? And in turn, like, if we see Bruce Lee was such a hero, and is such a hero to so many people. Anybody who feels like they've been stepped on, Bruce is their hero, right? From here to Bosnia. And so if we can see Bruce as that type of person, maybe like our struggle we can use to be able to connect in solidarity with everybody else who's suffering the same way that we are. So Bruce became a symbol, and I was like, shoot, the book is not just about him being born here, and him living in Hong Kong, and him coming back to the States. It's really about the rise of Bruce Lee and the rise of Asian America and how they take place at the same time. And how the same kinds of things are driving both the folks who emerge out of the Bay Area calling themselves Asian American instead of Oriental, and how Bruce, taking the stage, deciding to go back to Hong Kong because that's where he can be seen and become a hero, right? Because Hollywood's picture of him is not the same picture that he has of himself. He sees himself as a hero. Hollywood sees him as a servant, right? I mean, as much ass as Cato kicked, he was still a servant. He was still a driver. He was still a cook for the Green Hornet, for Britt Reed. And so he goes back, and so in that way he begins to embody the hopes of an entire generation. And so when his movies come back here to Chinatown and they're playing across the street from the International Hotel in the Bella Union Theater, like it's Chinese folks, but it's other Asian Americans, it's poor white folks, it's black folks, it's Latino folks who, when Bruce encounters the sign that says no dogs in Chinese allowed and he kicks it, who are all cheering together. And I think that was the story that was literally screaming to be told from our street walls at that particular moment. And so that's the book that I tried to set out to write.
So I love that. I mean, it's so aspirational to find that context and to write that book. And you know, the book begins when he's like, we start with his father, and he talks about his mother, and he talks about his parents and everything. And then what I'm interested in is that moment when Dozier, from offering the #1 son role, he said no. And so is that the right name, Bill Dozier? Is that how you said it? Or yeah. So for the Green Hornet, Bruce Lee was offered a different role as the #1 son on a different.
The #1 son of Charlie Chan.
Charlie Chan, yeah. The #1 son of Charlie Chan.
Yeah.
So it's very like, we found a quote that said, Bruce Lee said, I didn't want to jump around with pigtails and say chop chop. So he rejected that, right? Because of the stereotype it took. And let's talk about now the context of those years and how, as you mentioned it, how he saw himself versus how America saw Chinese. Because there you start to see the fomentation of the ethnic movement, the ethnic studies movement that started to come out of the 60s and civil rights movement. So let's talk about what that meant in terms of American, and just like I'm not going to talk about global American role in Hong Kong, that's not what my point is. But there's a movement from mainland to Hong Kong, and that's where Bruce grew up. And then there was this growing American movement from the south to the north because of African-American slavery and history there. So, what is the larger context that we're experiencing that created this opportunity for Bruce to come out?
That's a lot of history. I try to figure out how to do this in real yeah, that's why the book is like 500 pages, 60 pages. But to maybe kind of narrow it down, right? Like, Bruce was a film star. He was a child film star, with all of the baggage that comes with being a child star in Hong Kong. Because his father was an actor. His father was one of the most famous comedians in Chinese opera. And then when film begins to take off after the Chinese War ends filmmaking in China. And everybody comes to Hong Kong, and Hong Kong's film industry blows up. Bruce rises with that. But he gets into too many fights, and I'm compressing a lot of history here. Because on the one hand, he's like this really smooth, handsome, suave, cha-cha dancing teen idol. And then on the other hand, he's like really he loves the taste of blood on his mouth. He loves to get into street fights. And there's a street fighting culture because all these folks that have come across the border are bringing their styles with them. And it's like schools get into this fight culture called Bemo, and they fight each other on the rooftops in this really ritualized kind of sport to see who's better. And Bruce is all up in this. And then all of those folks that are involved in this culture end up coming into the film industry later, about 10 years later, in the mid-60s, and that's where we get this explosion of Kung Fu movies, right? So all the stuff that they were saying before is, my school is better than your school. Like now they're doing it set in Ming Dynasty robes and like put into films and then beamed across the world where black folks see it in theaters, in inner city theaters and on TV, and are inspired, and that's the story of the links between hip hop and Asian America in a nutshell. But to go back to the story, to answer your question, he is offered the role of being the #1 son of Charlie Chan, because at that time Hollywood sees only two ways that Asian males can be portrayed: as Fu Manchu, right, the Yellow Peril, right, or as Charlie Chan, the good Chinaman, right? And so there's a TV show that comes across this guy's desk, Bill Dozier, and he's all like, oh, maybe you can try out for this. But of course, ABC, the television networks, don't think that America's ready for an Asian American hero. So they're like, well, we'll have you be the Orientalish sidekick. That's literally what he says. We'll have you be the Orientalish sidekick of the Green Hornet. Bruce goes in, he's like, okay, he's 24 years old, he doesn't really know what limitations are placed upon him. And he goes in and he gets an acting coach, and he sits as an acting coach, and his acting coach says, okay, let's see your lines. And Bruce is like, I don't have any. They didn't give me any lines. So like for the first quarter of the season, if you see these episodes, the lines consist of, okay, boss, and like, where should we go? And, oh, wow. That's literally what he says, right? And everybody who's seen the Green Hornet can remember all that, right? But the thing is he expands the role because he's the cook, he's the driver, the Green Hornet's in the back seat telling him, go fu, go fu. And he's like, all right, I'll go and do it, because what happens is in every episode, the Green Hornet gets into trouble and he can't defend himself. He's pretty much a weakling. He has like tools, he has like gadgets. He's a James Bond type of character because American heroes wear big guns and they have gadgets, right? That's how American heroes are. Clint Eastwood, John Wayne, when they fight in the fights, it's like, boom, and they're like, oh. And Bruce actually knows how to fight. So in every episode, there's this scene at about the 20th minute where Bruce has to save the Green Hornet's ass and kick whatever ass of the criminal that's there. And that's what the kids latch onto. So halfway through the season, they look at the toy sales and they realize that the Green Hornet is selling less than Kato. Like, Kato's the one. And I think that this is the moment where he's like, oh, like, there's something bigger here. They give him roles, he writes a script, he actually tries to write in Asian philosophy into these things, and he finds, it takes him a while to figure out that Hollywood is not interested in that. And so that's when he goes back to Hong Kong.
If anybody who is standing needs to sit, there is a bench here, and you can sit. I can move this speaker. Does anybody want to come and sit? And also, anybody who feels flexible, like my little boy here, could sit on the ground. There's a nice carpet here. Just want to make it as hospitable as we can. Anybody who needs to sit, you can join us here on the side. I'll move this, and this is a nice bench for folks to sit on. It's a community center, guys. Feel at home, make yourself at home. So, Kato and the Green Hornet was a time when we see Bruce Lee coming out on the American screen and taking over. It was just unstoppable. And can you tell us about the political context that's happening in America at that time?
So we're in a movement where the Black Panthers have gotten going here in Oakland. Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, and self-defense is becoming sort of the watchword across communities of color in thinking about what's happening in segregated communities of color, and also in thinking about the question of what people of color are to the U.S. So the civil rights is moving. So-called Negroes are renaming themselves Black. So-called Mexican Americans are renaming themselves Chicano. And in Berkeley, a group of folks gets together and says, we're not going to call ourselves Oriental anymore, we're going to call ourselves Asian American. And this is sort of the beginnings of the Third World Liberation Front. And so Bruce is not a political activist. Bruce is not participating in any of these movements. But Bruce is also representing the counterculture. He's very aware as he moves through Hollywood between 1967, the year that the Green Hornet is taken off the air, to 1971, that he's not getting any parts because they're not seeing him as anything but subservient. So he can play a fight choreographer, or he can play a villain, or he can play somebody who is in a very kind of stereotypical role. And what he says is I'm not going to play anybody with a Q, right? That's something that's deep to him. I'm not going to play a Manchu, right? But I'm gonna need to get roles that are better than this, and he finds after 4 years that he can't do that. And so I think that at that particular moment, he's drawing on all of his experiences that he's had becoming American. When he came to the US, he was here in San Francisco for summer, and then he got into trouble here, so his parents were like, you're going to Seattle, where there's fewer Chinese and fewer distractions, and you're gonna work and go to school. You're gonna work in a restaurant and go to school. And there he meets his first student, who is an African American, Black American, whose formative childhood experience was being beaten by police at the age of 12. And then he meets a Japanese American, that's Jesse Glover. Then he meets a Japanese American who becomes his best friend, Taki Kimura, who when he was 18 was incarcerated in concentration camps because he was Japanese American. And so this is where I think Bruce begins to think about what it actually means. He's in Hong Kong, he's been a privileged sort of kid, and he thinks about what it means for him to actually be identifying with the underdogs. And I think that's the beginning of him like really internalizing who he becomes. So that in the movies he's playing the person who's working on the side of the workers, or he's playing an anti-colonialist, right, in Shanghai, or he's playing somebody who goes to another country to take care and protect fellow restaurant workers who are on the verge of being gentrified by a local thug, right? And then, of course, Enter the Dragon, which is sort of a third world opus. And so he plays these heroes who are identifying with the folks who are being oppressed and being put upon. And I think that what he's putting into that is his experience here, living in the U.S. after the age of 18, up to the age of about 30.
Yeah, and in your book, it talks about how, Jesse and, Bruce is out there in Seattle saying, oh, let's go fight those guys, let's pick these fights, and people don't, people look at Bruce and be like, Bruce, you just can't go fight a bunch of white people in Seattle, like, that's crazy. He's like, we can win it. It's like, well, yeah, and then what's gonna happen? So he didn't understand the larger context of racial history and politics in America. So he's brash. It was in Hong Kong too. He didn't understand what was happening. He's like, I'll fight anybody. And his parents like, you keep fighting this police chief's son, you're gonna go, it's not gonna work. And that's what happened. He kept fighting people and he got kicked out of Hong Kong.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's the same place to go like temperate. And then so Jesse, he like redirected Bruce in a way to teaching. Because Bruce needed to show himself, like prove himself. And that was the issue. He had this complex where he was like, oh, your way's not good, my way's better, and whether it is or not, that's not the point. The point is he was trying to prove it. And Jesse Glover came to him and was like, I love in your book, Jesse's like punching, I didn't know this was new, I learned a lot from your book, but Jesse like had studied some martial arts and some boxing, and he's like, he tracked Bruce's walkways on a daily basis, and he'd like get in front of him and like punch the posts, and I'm like, imagine being that guy and being like, Bruce being like, well, what is this guy doing? These crazy guys punching these standing poles, right? So anyway, my point is, you know, we see here an African-American young man who had been beaten badly by the police, got his face messed up, wired his jaw shut, coming to Bruce for a sifu. He wanted a teacher, a sensei, which, you know, he wasn't allowed to study with the jiu-jitsu senseis. They said, you can study up to the brown belt, we're not giving you a black belt, right? And so maybe we can start to pivot, bring in Adisa to this conversation. When African-American folks started seeing these movies come out, Enter the Dragon begins with that exact story of a black man being subject to police brutality, harassed by the cops. How did African-Americans at that time start to see cinema, and then fighting itself as a form of expression that's not necessarily just combat, but a way to make a stand against oppression and systems of oppression?
Yeah, well, thank you guys for having me. Everybody, this is an honor. Yeah, so my name is Adisa. I teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at Affirmative San Jose and Affirmative Santa Clara. I'm doing Jiu-Jitsu for a long time, and you know, my first introduction to Bruce Lee was in 1979. My dad brought this contraption called a VHS machine, and he had two VHS tapes. One was Alien, which no. I was like,
Scott masterpiece.
What else you got? We got Return of the Dragon. So I'm like, all right, cool. Put that in. My dad's like, you're really, really gonna like this. I'm like, all right, cool. And he was right. I immediately went downstairs, started sawing up the broomsticks to make up the nunchucks, hit myself in the face. You know what I mean? And I was like, oh, this is hard actually. I can't just start swinging these things. And so, you know, I grew up in the suburbs, and it was very racist, you might imagine, you know. And so I love Bruce Lee. You know, I could identify immediately with everything that he was going through. And so, you know, my father's from the Mission District. My mother actually was saved by the same hospital where Bruce was born. She had an asthma attack before she met my father, and they saved her life. So I wouldn't be here, right, legit, at all, if they hadn't saved her life. And so, you know, I have a great affinity for the Asian community in general, and Chinatown specifically. I used to work at Wu Yi for a brief stint, and so I really enjoy the Chinese community here, and I feel honored to be just in this part of the world. But I think that, you know, in hip hop, I think that he's probably the biggest social icon outside of Malcolm X. I think like they're kind of parallel, you know what I mean? Whereas like, you know, Malcolm X was the philosophical stand up for yourself, defend yourself, etc. But Bruce was the how, right? Bruce was the how. And so, you know, this thing is a really big deal. I'm really glad that you mentioned the, you know, the Black Panther Party for self-defense. People always leave that out. They often leave that out. And what's crazy is, I spent several years coming to Chinatown, Pacific, learning from Kilu Nyasha, who is one of the first women in the Black Panther Party. And I studied with her directly for like 2 years. And, you know, her love for the Chinese community was just a default setting. And going up and down Pacific at 10 o'clock, whatever, like I would never felt unwelcome, I never felt unsafe. And so, you know, what Bruce's films did, and I don't think a lot of people get it, I know you get it, but a lot of people don't get it, is that basically Bruce's films gave Black America a blueprint for self-defense in a hostile foreign nation of descendants of slaves, right? And so this ability to see a man with his hands defend his culture, with his mouth show a philosophical edge, right? Even, you know, and some people used to argue with me about this, I still think that a lot of the vegan movement inside Black America comes from these films. Because, oh, they're not eating meat? Oh, well then what do they eat? Well, tofu, well this and that. Like, and so I've had some pushback from people on the East Coast who say, well, you know, there already was like Jamaican Ital type stuff, but I'm from San Francisco, bro, I wasn't seeing that. You know what I'm saying? And so even if you look at the rise of Buddhism in the Black community over the last few decades, right? It's palpable, and I can't say it wouldn't have happened without Bruce Lee, but it's hard to imagine that it would have the momentum that it does without Bruce Lee's work. And so for myself, I know I would not be a martial artist today were it not for Bruce Lee. Like, I absolutely know it. I have no doubts about that. And what happened for me back to hip hop was that when Public Enemy came out, you know, a lot of people in the beginning of Public Enemy, they don't really remember, the people who would be on stage with them would call the S1Ws, right? Security of the first world, because they didn't consider themselves third world people, right? The first world, the original inhabitants, the indigenous people. And they were the defenders of Public Enemy. And like, I'm a young kid, I don't know nothing, and I think they're like legit soldiers. So I'm like, well, what do I gotta learn to be an S1W? Like, do they have a draft? Like, how do I sign up? And, you know, that was really what led me into like, you know, Filipino martial arts and stuff like that. And then, you know, when it comes full circle, when the pandemic hit and everybody was being rough with Asian Americans, one of my elder friends called and he was like, and he was a black belt in several martial arts, but he was like, you know, my wife and I are really concerned about being attacked, and you know, he's picking her up from the BART station to make sure nothing happens. And he was like, can you show us some jiu-jitsu? And at the time I was a brown belt. I had not yet got my black belt, and I was like, absolutely. And so I spent, you know, a decent part of that time teaching Asian elders how to defend themselves. And, you know, that was my debt to Bruce. Right? That was my debt to Bruce. And I still stand on that today. So, you know, this thing is full circle, and even now, with all the insanity of what's happening in the world, we need to remind ourselves of where we came from. We need to remind ourselves of these alliances. You know, even in, you know, Asada Shakur, who's Tupac's godmother. Now, Tupac's godfather gave me my middle name. And so, you know, Tupac really knew how to defend himself, and he was a really big fan of martial arts. And if you read her book, Asada, she talks about being in, I think, Golden Gate Park, and she was with some friends, and then the police come and they start clubbing people up, and it turned into this chaotic scene, and she, like, they can't really escape, and this Chinese guy pulls up with the Jeep, and he's like, get in, right, because it's really crazy, and they pull off, and he was like, yeah, man, you know, like, this is why I never, like, smoke weed or drink or whatever, and she was like, dang, I was at risk, because I kind of, you know what I mean, let myself get a little too casual in the park, and then it got chaotic, and so she said, like, I stopped smoking and drinking at that point. And so, you know, this idea of what Muhammad Ali talked about, like, after he won in Zaire, is he was speaking to these delegates, and he said, you know, the one thing that the people on the continent of Africa had, that the African American community had lost, is that we had lost our ability to have dignity in our poverty, right? And that really blew me away, like, even then. And I think that that's even gotten worse now in Black America. But I think that this is one thing that I think the Chinese community, and I think most Asian American cultures, has been able to preserve, is maintaining their dignity in their poverty. And that doesn't mean that everything's perfect or whatever, but like, right now, all non-white communities should be focusing on how to maintain and cultivate that, and using actual martial art practice, not just a philosophy, to galvanize inwardly and outwardly.
So I think this idea of dignity is really important in this conversation. I think that a lot of what Bruce fought for was dignity. Same thing with, like you said, a lot of you know, Black Americans sought for dignity, Malcolm X sought for dignity. A lot of this could be seen as equality and equity. One thing I think, bringing it back to Bruce, that I love about fighting is interesting, is that, you know, here we are with John Lewis, you know, standing above us, and at the one family block party we're going to have, a talk by an author of a new book about the world champion boxer Pancho Villa, who's Filipino. And you think about boxing in the Western world as kind of like an apotheosis or an apex of fighting, right? It's like you mentioned in the Western movies, all they did was throw these really slow, stupid haymakers, right? They just don't know how to throw a punch. Boxers do, sure. There's some really great boxers, but nobody kicked. And people would thought on a street fight, in that time period before Bruce, it was very undignified to kick somebody. Like you kick a dog, you never kick a person, which I think is funny because as a kung fu person who studied as a descendant of Lao Bun, the first kung fu master in Chinatown, kicking is essential, right? Like I spent like the first 3 years of my life doing nothing but kicking. Or not my life, first 3 years of my kung fu life doing nothing but kicking. I learned to kick first. And so, I look back on what you talk about dignity and how Bruce changed that because a lot, K-Dub, the artist who made the artwork in the hallway here, was talking to me about seeing Enter the Dragon as an African American growing up in South Central, and he's like, "Oh shit, I can kick people!" Like I can, and he saw Bruce, and Bruce changed how he was able to defend himself. And I'm not advocating violence against people. I'm not saying we should go kick people. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is Bruce brought a new framework for what self-defense and combat could be.
Yes.
And then then you get into, the 60s and 70s, the Vietnam War era. Obviously, combat is on our doorstep. We're seeing the failures of the U.S. military abroad. A generation of people of color are sent as fodder to the front lines, whereas generals, soldiers are kept back. There's music made about that. Bruce Lee is making amazing films at the time. And so we're questioning as a society what we value, and at the same time, Bruce Lee is presenting this new art form of kung fu, So let's bring it now forward. We're seeing the rise of civil rights movement. We mentioned the Black Panthers Party, self-defense. Black Panther Party of Self-Defense is rising. And we're getting now into later phases, and Bruce Lee is now, unfortunately come to the end of his life. And, let's talk about the next phase. So the rise of hip-hop and where that intersects the idea of the echo, the growth of the movement of making an Asian American beyond Bruce. So perhaps you can tell us now, where do we shift from Bruce Lee as central, defining the canon of martial arts, redefining how we as people defend ourselves in public, and how we identify as a community. How does that shift into a larger movement beyond Bruce?
Well, I guess maybe the first thing to say is, and this is for all the martial artists in the room, right? There's one of the subtexts of the book is this question of what does it mean to be a warrior, right? What does it mean to be somebody who's a fighter? And I think that goes for the activists and the organizers in the room as well. And just to say that Bruce, so we have this war secretary getting up, gathering all the generals from around the world to sit down so he can give a lecture on what the warrior ethos is. And he's basically the warrior ethos is shave your beard, do more pull-ups, be a man, even if you're a woman, be a man. It's basically about the image of the warrior. And that's not what Bruce was about. He would have called that self-image actualization. But the warrior ethos was about defending yourself, your loved ones, your principles, your values, your community, and trying to figure out how to expand that so that you never have to go to war, right? And that's I think the difference with Bruce. Jeet Kune Do was the way of the intercepting fist. So it's not like you're going to be the aggressor, which is essentially what they're putting out in this meeting earlier this week, right? This sort of Secretary of War. We got to fight the war within and put troops in Portland and Memphis and San Francisco and all of these, cities, Washington, D.C. It's, if somebody's going to come at you, you're intercepting that fist. But you're not putting that fist out. And I think that's the thing that's lost in all of this type of stuff. So that's just to say that the movement in the 1960s here was anti-militarist, right? It was anti-war, it was anti-economic inequities, right? And it was anti-racist. And that was the same thing that Martin Luther King was about, right? And Malcolm X was about that. Like all of these folks, and Bruce Lee was about that as well. And so, you know, Jeff told me that there's some folks that are on the internet calling my book racist and woke. I'm just telling the truth. If reality has a woke, you know, bias, then hey, it's got a woke bias, right? But this is what people were about. This is what fighting was about. And so when Bruce passes away, the movement continues to grow, and Bruce becomes a symbol for the next generation. For me and Adisa and you who grew up like not necessarily being able to see Bruce in the theaters for the first time because we weren't born or because like we were too young and it was like R or X rated depending on where you lived, right? Like we saw Bruce on TV, that's how we grew up. He became our hero because he represented like coolness as well as strength and power, right? We put him behind 2 turntables and he's about to get busy. And then this next generation puts him up on the walls as a symbol of strength and pride and solidarity. And I think we're all with that as well. So the movement had continued to evolve and grow, and Bruce becomes the symbol, so that the symbol of Bruce is not separate from Asian America. Like Bruce is Asian America. Yeah. And I think that like in all of the things that we've done over the last 50 plus years since he's passed, like I think that he's always been there, embedded in our consciousness as somebody who can overcome these great odds.
I love that. Bruce is Asian America for sure, and the idea of what is Asian America grew out of this resistance to a system of oppression. It grew out of like a need for identifying a specific history, the ethnic history of a community. And I think that there is a connection there, specifically with hip hop, in the need to find a way of self-expression through breakdancing, through DJing, through rapping that defied structurally the sound and the music at the time, right? And looking at Bruce Lee, a lot of people in hip hop will say that the way of the intercepting fist, or Jeet Kune Do, can be seen as a way of remixing. And Bruce studied many different martial arts. And he took from it a lot of things. So Gene, right here, who's writer for Kung Fu Magazine, Inside Kung Fu, right?
Kung Fu Magazine.
Kung Fu Magazine. I was right the first time.
You were.
Don't double guess yourself. He, you know, is known to have a lot of his style coming from fencing, because he was a fencer. He studied a lot of fencing, right? And then he took the jab from Jack Dempsey. Right. And so he took from a black boxer, he took the jab. And then we'll talk about this down at the festival. We're talking about joint locks, getting that from judo, getting that from jujitsu. And Wing Chun, obviously, a lot of that. But he's taking all the forms, and unlike traditional Chinese style, where you study with one teacher, one form to perfect it, he's picking and choosing, and he's remixing martial arts. And that is very similar to how DJ samples music and remixes music to create a new thing. So I want to get to some questions from the audience, but first, just let's pass the mic to Adisa. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about Wu-Tang Clan, and like even the name, the Wudang Temple comes from Wu-Tang Clan, right? It's all connected in the way that martial arts and Asian American identity was coming through the filter of popular culture at the time, and African Americans were into popular culture. So as a famous journalist and who was in hip hop from the beginning, writing about it and connecting about it and identifying the playmakers and the rainmakers at the time, what do you see in terms of hip hop, Jeet Kune Do, and the growth of that resistance movement?
No, I think it's huge. I mean, I think it's still, it's going to take a while for us to really weigh it because it's that heavy. Right. And I really mean that, like it's that heavy. And so, you know, again, I think that when you're looking at Bruce's impact on Black America, a lot of what you're really seeing is Black people from all these different parts of Africa who get dragged over here, cut off from their culture, cut off from their religion and all these various religions and everything. And what Bruce gave them was permission to defend themselves. He gave them permission to, okay, I know y'all like boxing, but there's more, like you said, like kicking, like grappling and all these other things. And that it's good, not to be a bully, but to be a defender. You know, when I'm teaching my kids all the time, I'm always telling them, look, I'm teaching you because I don't believe anybody on this planet was put here to be abused. Like, none of you were put here on this planet to be abused. At the same time, it's important to me that because I'm teaching these things that are actually dangerous, that you never become an abuser. So I cannot hear about you coming back, oh, he was beating up somebody, or he tried to take some money, or she was beating up this girl trying to make her feel some kind of way. I was like, I don't tolerate that. And that too comes from Bruce, right? That it's not just about being forceful, but that there's an ethical edge to everything that you do. As far as hip hop, absolutely, total remix, right, of everything. A sampling of style, a sampling of philosophy, a sampling of physicality based on your body type and things like that. Like, I remember many years ago when I was trying to learn Filipino stick fighting, which I was always horrible at. I asked my instructor at the time, like, well, you know, what do you think about Bruce Lee? And he said, you know, Bruce Lee's style Jeet Kune Do is great. It's great for him because he understood how he moved. And like, it took me a minute to really understand how he was tailor-making Jeet Kune Do for his body type, his style, and also the psychology. And I think that over time, like even with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it was very regimented like a long time ago. Like you only really did what your instructor told you to do. And only recently have Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people that even are not black belts will be like, actually if you grab palm down instead of palm up, it's stronger because X, because they're taking it off of their training. And I think that license to create spontaneously and be the fighter you want to be based on your, again, physicality and inclinations comes from Bruce. It's a really beautiful thing. And if anything makes me sad, because I'm not one of these people that complains about modern hip hop too much, but I do have to say that I feel like a lot of today's artists, many of them, not all, but a lot of these younger people, they're just trying to make a hit. They just want to go viral really quick. They just want to be able to provide for their family. So they're not saying who they are anymore, right? If you look at Bruce, what did he say about martial arts? You know, I can say all these things, but to express myself honestly, right? You know, and so now this guy is a clone of that person who's a clone of that person, and nobody's being like, I actually just like kung fu, eating vegetables, and fighting my friends. No one's doing that. You know what I mean? And so we need to kind of get towards that kind of, we need to give ourselves that license. I wish, if anything, people would give ourselves that license, because the reality of the day is that we have always been one family under the sky. Once we're born and we die the same way. But it's that time in between that we get to decide who we're going to be for ourselves and each other. And that's what Bruce really, really gave me.
Thank you. So we have 5 minutes, and I'd like to open up the floor. If you have a question, I could hand you a mic, or you could stand up and just speak loudly. Does anybody have a question for our panelists here?
Well, I've been involved with the Chinese Historical Society for a long time, and I really applaud you, Justin, for giving us a space to talk about Bruce Lee, but also Malcolm X and Jeff. So my question is, I know, Jeff, you've probably seen this, but could you reflect, well, maybe all three of you can reflect on, have you all seen the Lost interview of Bruce Lee?
Yeah.
You saw that, right? Okay. Pierre Brennan, that was made in 1971 or 72, about a year or two before he passed away in 1973. Could you reflect on this and share the significance of that interview?
Sure. And you can see this if you haven't seen it on YouTube. It's a black and white interview. It's actually the only video extant, I could be wrong, Jeff Chang, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the only extant video interview that we have of Bruce where he's in such length and depth. And it's a powerful interview. And the reason it comes to us now is because at some point Pierre asked him to recite the lines that he did in a TV show called Launch Street, in which he talks about water, right? And so the excerpt that we hear of his voice that leads up to, water can flow or it can crash, be water, my friend, comes from that interview. But the reason that it was so important in Bruce's life at that particular moment is that he had just days before been denied the role in a TV series on ABC that was called Kung Fu, or Kung Fu. Kung Fu, let's say Kung Fu, it's not Kung Fu, it was Kung Fu, right? And now Bruce, of course, as you all know, Bruce is like the one who, probably more than just about anybody else, popularized Kung Fu, the martial art, in the US. And in Hollywood, all the Asian American folks who hear about this role, I talked to George Takei, they're like, oh, this is a perfect role for Bruce. And so he's asked to go and audition for this role. The audition is pretty exciting. He walks in the room, he has an athletic bag, he drops the bag, he does a flurry of punches at the white producer, and he takes out his nunchuck and he starts swinging around in the guy's face. The guy's like, whoa, 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 okay. And the next day, he gets a call from Bruce's person, Fred Weintraub, who has been pushing him. He's on the movie side. He's been pushing the TV guy to hire him for this movie. And he saw, well, what do you think of the kid? And this guy goes, well, I think he might be too authentic. Right? And then he says, nobody's going to understand him. Nobody's going to understand his accent. Because Bruce has an Asian American accent, right? I say Asian American accent as a way of flipping it, right? Because everybody wants to say, oh, you have a non-American. I say I have an Asian American accent. It happens to be tinged by Hawaii, right? Yeah, you could have an Asian American accent. It could be tinged by Malaysia or Taiwan or wherever you're coming from, right? Korea, Filipino, right? That's the way I flip it. Bruce has an Asian American accent. It's not about the accent itself, it's about the value that people put on the accent, right? And that's a way to be able to signify, we still don't think that you can be a hero. And so he's dealing with all this. It crushes him. It's one of those moments where he doesn't know like how to actually verbally articulate this. And so this is also the thing, and I think this is what you were asking about. This is also the interview in which he is asked, the very last question of Pierre Burton is, so what do you think? Do you think you're going to be a North American, you're going to stay here and try to make it, as an Oriental? And again, like we're given two choices. You can be an Oriental or you can be an American, right? If you're going to be an American, then you better speak like us, right? Or sound like us. Even though Bruce has a British accent, right? You better sound like us, you better look like us. You're going to be American, right? Or you're going to just be an Oriental and be, your superstar here. We get those two choices. This has been the choice that's always been offered to us, even to our kids today in schools, right? They get asked to write an essay. Do you feel more Asian or do you feel more American? Well, I feel both. Where's the room for that? And so Bruce, in his unwillingness to be able to capitulate to that question, but also to be able to make a larger point, like, I just want to be seen. He says, you know what? Under the sky, under the heavens, there is but one family. That's how he answers this question about, are you Asian, or are you Oriental, or are you American? He says, under the skies, there's but one family. It just so happens we're all different, right? He's all like, what he's saying, and this has been read as, this is Bruce being colorblind, right? I don't think so. I think this is Bruce saying, see me and see everybody in their full humanity. And that's what one family means to me, right? And so people are now maybe out there, Jeff said, are out there saying, my book is racist because I assert that. I don't think that I'm wrong here. And I think that as we, and this is the point that I want to make to that brother who's saying that this book is too old for him, when you begin to see Bruce's struggles, right, for what they were, for what he actually went through, then you should be an even bigger hero to you. Because you should be able to understand all of the struggles that he went through to get to what he got to. His accomplishments look even bigger than you probably even gave him credit for. If you see him as he saw himself. And I think that in that way, when you finish reading this book, the specificity of being an Asian American is there, but it becomes even more of a universal story in that way. And that's how I'd like to conclude it.
Very good, thank you. What a great place to end this on. What a great note. Keep it going, Jeff Chang, author of Vladimir Echo. I want to thank Aditya Banjoko. And then shout out to all you guys who have the charity stores inside of America. Annie Lee at CAA, thanks for your advocacy and your support. Gold House, Justin Zoo's in the house right here. Thank you so much for supporting us. Walter Lin, Interim Executive Board President, CHSA, thank you so much for supporting us. Jeff Chang, who's our lead docent and major supporter here, thank you so much. Vincent Pan, board member, and also CAA co-executive. And so many other people to thank. We're really excited to have you all here. And have some snacks if there's any left, have some tea. The police chief is here, I believe. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. We feel safe having you here. We're glad you could be here. I want you sitting next to me right here. I feel like an authority figure right next to me, but then it looks like you're happy there, so thank you for being here, being on with our panel. All of our volunteers at CHSA, thank you so much. All of you guys for being here. If you're not a member, buy your membership upstairs. We have donations available. We're selling a really rare, if anybody's a collector, a really rare Bruce Lee pin that you can only get with a donation to CHSO. If you're interested in that, talk to me. It's a donation, but it's also a really rare collectible as well. And then lastly, we have our street festival on Waverly. So go down there, hang out, get some lunch and some boba tea, get a free poster, listen to some music, and support the community. Thank you, everybody.